All right, and good evening and welcome to Third Rail Thursday. It is, what is it, March 6th, 2025. I'm Denny, this is N Scale Dystopia, and I had every technical problem in the first 7 minutes of tonight you could possibly have. Anyway, it is nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, I'm sorry for the delay. I don't know what happened. Everything was working great, and then I came down, sat down, and the whole world went away on me. Anyway, tonight I am going to be working on building a little Varipulse throttle. And so this was something that I did just a couple days ago. I finished wiring the layout and I built one of these little throttles, and I have two of them. And I was really surprised that so many people were interested in it. I didn't think that people would be interested in a DC throttle, number one, and I was very surprised to find out that people wanted to know where to get them, how they put them together. And so because I have a second one, I thought what I would do is I would do my best in the time that I have to put the second throttle together. It also strikes me that there are maybe a group of people out there that have never put together an electronics kit. And so I thought, you know what, I'll just talk about some of the processes that go into it. This was very popular when I was younger. There was a store in Toronto, Ontario, which I think is still there, called Active Surplus. They had a great big gorilla standing outside, and you could go down and you could buy all sorts of electronic kits, and you would, sit down with your soldering iron and build them. And honestly, this whole little kit is a throwback to that era. So for tonight, let's sit down and see how many times I can burn my fingers and how many solder fumes I can breathe in. Anyway, with that, I think it's obviously I got to spend a bit of time thanking people for joining me here. So, Anthony Bourdain, good evening. Pine Valley Railroad, Dundas Junction Model Railroad, which Dundas Junction, James is actually participating in an open house. I think it is next weekend. If you're in the area, go check it out. I'm going to try to go visit James. It might be worthwhile, James, if you want to throw something in the chat for people to see. Curly Express, Floyd Robinson, M&M Rails, Pat Smith, good evening, Pat. John Train, Kraus Rails, Approach Medium. Kris May. Curly, M&M. M&M's been talking a lot tonight. Todd Armstrong, Floyd Robinson. And it looks like that is everyone who's polluting the... Oh, and Brian Ferguson. Everyone that seems to be polluting the chat tonight. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining in. And a special shout out to some of the members who are showing up here. They're nice bright green. I appreciate you guys. All right, so just sort of going backwards a little bit. So as I said in the beginning, I finished wiring the layout, or principally wiring the layout, just this past weekend, and I now have trains running. And I cannot tell you what a thrill it is. I stand down here and just let them go in a circle for an hour, and I'm thrilled. So I'd forgotten how much I enjoy just running trains in a circle. And you know what? We're back at that space. And as I had mentioned in the previous video, this layout is being wired for future DCC, which means it's got bus wires and feeders, and it's correctly blocked out. But for the time being, I'm going to run it on DC because I have almost exclusively DC equipment, and the reason I have so much of that equipment is because it's what I can find used and it's affordable, and DC equipment is generally affordable. And so I built one of these little Varipulse throttles. And as a really quick primer, what it is that it changes AC current to DC pulse current. DC pulse current is pretty straightforward. If you think about adding DC current or DC current to one of your locomotives, one of the ways you can do it is you increase the voltage level, 1 volt, 2 volt, 3 volt, all the way up to 12 or 14 volts. And depending upon the amount of voltage you're adding, that determines the speed of the locomotive. One of the other ways you do it is with pulse. And what that means is that you're giving it spikes of 12 or 14 volts in different intervals. So the closer the spikes are together, the faster it goes because the motor is turning more rapid or more consistently. And the further apart you put the pulses, the slower the locomotive moves. But using pulse means that like getting the motor to turn is easier because it gets the full voltage. And so I put one of these little, and so the MRC power packs that are quite popular, they use the same technology. It's pulse technology. Anyway, so in this case, I built one of these little handheld throttles because I saw them online, or I found them, and they're so tiny and convenient. And because I've got 2 yards, passenger yards, I want to be able to just walk back and forth this little throttle. I put it together and it works amazing. It's got built-in momentum and I'm super happy with it. So what I want to do is I want to go over now putting one of these kits together for you. And they're fairly straightforward. Let me just get the chat back to the current state. Thank you, Pat Smith. Yes, getting the golden spike nailed down. I was going to paint a spike or something like that, and it didn't turn out. All right, so let's see. This is sort of interesting. So my project camera is not working. 1 second here. This is what I mean. It was crazy. Without the project camera, this is going to be quite an evening. Well, I can keep talking for a minute. Now, what is going on? Hello, Johnny K. Just got done running my new Kato 1943 on the Spirit Engine the loop. Everything always works fine until you don't go live. Mr. Approach Medium, it is so true. Just bear with me here, folks. I apologize. Adding a failing camera adds just the realism of your layout. Look at that. Ha! I win. Okay, so, yeah, the hearts come pouring out. Oh, the Mercy's beautiful here. So this, I realize the lighting might be a bit tricky here, but what comes in this particular kit is this little case, little acrylic case, and one of the things I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be completely overhauling the way that this looks. This is perfectly fine, but I do want to customize this so that it's got a much cooler aesthetic to it that fits the theme of the layout. And I've got little bits and bobs coming from AliExpress, and we'll see how that go. Good evening there, Nolan, Johnny Knoxville, and Chuck. So inside, what's inside the box? Well, there are some instructions about how to put this together, and we're going to be working through those together. I found the instructions the first time around fairly reasonable, but I would suspect if this was your first time ever building electronics kit, there might be some gaps in it. And then what's in the box, or what's in the bag? And this is everything that shows up in this. So it's got a printed circuit board that's very well labeled. And then this is all of the little bits and bobs that come with it, a series of transistors, bridge rectifiers, transformers, and a few potentiometers. I realize that all of this is going to be easy to see, but that's what's in the box. And so this will build you the throttle. And then inside this little case, because I did put one of these together, just get this open, is the speed control potentiometer, the knob which we'll leave out, and the direction control. And this is actually a heat sink. In this case, I also ordered a little bit extra wire. I got about 8 feet of wire because the layout, that'll fit within that. In terms of cost for these things, I think the controller worked out to be about $45 for this, so I think this is super affordable. Okay, so getting started on this, so the instructions are pretty clear, and the first thing it wants you to do is it wants you to install some of the resistors. as a primer for people who maybe aren't aware, resistors, and I'm confident this will be impossible to see in the camera, but the resistors, yeah, pretty much impossible, have little colored stripes on them, and that designates the sort of size of them. And so they've been good enough to say, so what is the, I think it's, is it done in ohms? I forget now. So the resistors, he lays out that like there's a PCB designation called 241, and so on the printed circuit board you look for 241, and that's going to give you the location of that resistor. And it's a 240, which means it's got red, yellow, and brown stripes on it. And I thought I was young enough to be able to see these things still, and it has been a humbling experience trying to pick out the colors on these things because they are certainly very small. So I need to find red, yellow, brown. This is exciting, isn't it? If it's the last one I pick up, watch, it'll be, I've already picked it up more than once and I can't see it. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use my phone and my camera. Is that it there? Seriously, I struggled with this when I put this thing together the first time. Nope, that's not it. Use a multimeter. Thanks, Brian. I do have a multimeter, but I don't trust myself without the colors. So that's brown, black, red. That is the third one I need to put in. Seriously, folks, I thought we'd get off to a running start before this. I believe that's red, yellow, brown there. Yes, it is. Okay, that's red, yellow, brown. Oh my God. Sorry, folks. Okay. So, in terms of how we take care of this, as I said, in the instruction sheet, it's asking you to look for location number 241. And so I have found, I look around the PCB, and again, this is fairly small as well, so honest to goodness, a magnifying glass would not be the end of the world here. So 241 is located in this particular part of the PCB, and in this case, it's strange that this has already been pre-bent for me, but it has been. And what I'm going to do is it just slides through the holes into the PCB board where it's supposed to go. Right there. And then what you do is that you apply solder from the back of the board. So in most cases I would pre-bend the resistor, you push it through the holes, it fits properly, you go to the opposite side, and this is where you flood in a bit of solder. Now you have to use resin core solder, you do not use acid core solder on this. That's been something that I've experienced in the past. And even though the solder I have does have flux in it, I'm still just going to put a little bit of flux onto the joints so that it can flow in as much as possible. I have this spool of solder that I've got, the proper solder. I forget what size it is. It is resin or resin flux in it, and it's 0.02 inches. So it's really fine. It's meant specifically for doing things like PCB boards. And so I'll get my soldering iron heated up. Maybe it's time to build an O-scale layout. I feel like I'm 10 years away from that. And so in this case, get the soldering iron heated up. It's hot now. Come in from one side on the contact and just push the solder in and flood it until it piles up. And that's it. So the connection's made, resistor's in nice and tight, the two leads are up, and it's got a full pool of solder, not totally easy to see. And then I'm going to nip those off. Just some side cutters. And that's that. We're away to the races. We've started the hardest part. So number 2, orange, black, orange. That should be a little easier to find, because I just have to look for the black. There we go. Orange, black, orange. See, it was easy. We're going to bend down the lead wires on this. And the resistors are the easiest component to install because they're not polarized. Didn't you say that new flux you're using is terrible? I remember, yes, so this flux is not my favorite flux in the whole world, but I am going to do things correctly. So now I need to look for 303. Spot number 303. Where are we at here? 303. There we go. Push that through nice and flush on this side of the board. Come with a minor bit of flux on that, just to clean it up. Quick shot of solder. Done. Trim the leads. And it's carpeted down here, so I just cut the leads and let them fall into the carpet, and then I come down in my sock feet pretty often and step on them, and they just run right through the bottom of your foot. Good evening tonight, Bubs. How's it going? All right, next resistor, 102. Brown, black, red. I've already picked that guy out over here. Find slot number 102. There it is there. And this is a double-sided printed circuit board, which means there are electrical paths on both sides. And by flooding the solder in from the back side, it will make its way through to the front side as well, which means that there's connections both on the front and back sides of the board. And that one is on. Okay, so that's 3 resistors installed. Yeah, approach medium for sure. Particularly, the other one is rail joiners, which cost a premium. I've dropped a number of those on the rug, and I can't find them when I'm looking for them. But my feet definitely find them. So now, one of the things about the next resistor I need to install is that it is a variable resistor in terms of you pick the value you need. So this particular unit, or this particular kit, is designed to be used with Z scale, N scale, or HO scale. So it's not limited to N scale only. But one of the things that you do is that you select a resistor value that represents the scale because it helps define the top speed. So potentially, if you add the resistor that's meant for HO scale and you run it with Z scale, your trains will fly like rockets. It's just going to be too much for them. And so N scale is in the middle of the road here, and I'm looking for a resistor value that is about 2K. So it's 1K roughly for Z scale, 2K for N scale, and 2.7K for HO scale. So down here, I'm going to go for red, black, red. And let's see if I can't find that one now. After this, the rest of these pieces are easy to find. Good evening, Daz. Trackside Mike, nice to see you. It is alleged, so there's a couple different train shows coming up here in our area in the next couple weeks. There's the annual Double Headers Tour, which is a fairly, oh, right off the bat, there it is. Which is a fairly large tour of about 25 or 30 houses. And I've been musing a bit with Trackside Mike that if he comes down, we should try to get together and enjoy the show. And as I said, James is participating in a show, I think it's next weekend, and I'm going to try my best to get around to that area as well. Okay. All right, I think I found it. Yes, I did. All right, that's the last little guy, and this is the last of the vision-killing behaviors. Johnny Knoxville, Saturday, March 29th, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. The EDT Home Club Model Railroad Layout Tour. And so this is the PGM value one. We find PGM on this, and this resistor goes in here. Like so. Add a touch of flux again. And we'll hit it with a bit of solder. Okay, so before I go any further, there is plenty of lessons that I've learned over the years doing things like this, and I am just going to confirm before I go any further that I got the resistors right. After that, I am unconcerned. So, red, yellow, brown for the first resistor, correct. Orange, black, orange for the second resistor, correct. Brown, black, red for the third resistor. Correct. Red, black, red for the fourth resistor. Correct. Okay. That's all I needed to have happen. The rest of this now goes fairly quickly. Yeah, Trackside, my thank you. The March 22nd, it's the Brant Tour. So I think that is it Brant, Dundas, and Haldimand County, I think, is in that one as well. All right. Resistors are in place. So the next thing we need to take care of is something called diodes. And if you're new to this as well, let me just go through and explaining what diodes are. And they are an electrical component that, and here's an example of a big one, that only allow electrical current to flow one direction through them. So the current can move through it in one direction, but it cannot be reversed. And there is a positive and negative lead on them, and they're always designated by a stripe. So this is a rather big one. It has a stripe at one end, and that helps you understand what the negative lead is on it. Now, in this particular case, and they always have numbers on them. And so this one is an N5402. And there's two places for these. And so on the PCB, only because this is a large illustration, you can see that there is a drawing of a diode right here, and there is a large white line on it. And that's to basically help designate how you install this. So if it's your first time making one of these, you reference the instructions, you read the number off the diode, and then it's going to slip into the spot, and you have to make sure that you align the stripe on the diode with the drawing to get it into the right spot. And I'm going to get that one installed next. While I'm just doing this, I probably should just ask everyone for a audio check. I assume that everyone can hear you. If someone can just let me know if it's all working out. I can hear you. Sounds good. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so diodes in place. There's a second big one around here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to drop that in as well. And we're good. Can't hear James that well? You should try Monday nights. Plenty of James on the Mondays. All right, 2 diodes are in. Now, the remaining 2 diodes are much smaller. There's one little guy here, and there's one last little guy here. And again, each of them have stripes designating the anode and cathode on it. And these are going to go in next. So 4148, which is described as having a reddish body. That would be this little guy here. And it goes in at 1418, and I just have to find that now. 1418. Now, one of the things I would say about putting these little PCB boards together, and reason I'm being so careful, is I don't have a solder remover. And so if you do make a mistake, it is possible to use, like, it's a really small handheld little syringe to pull the solder back off of this. Or you can use something that looks like mesh or copper fabric that uses like a wick. I'm in no mood to try to remove these components tonight, so I'm going at this a little slowly so that I don't make any mistakes. Solder sucker, yes, thank you. The last time I did much of this sort of thing was probably 25 or 30 years ago, when Radio Shack was actually a going concern. You could get all these sort of components, and when I was in high school, we used to do a lot of this. This was the going, sort of like one of the fun things to do. And that sort of industry has dried up. And so that's why when I found this little kit, it's actually nostalgic to put this together. And the last one is, goes in. I worked at a medical device manufacturer and we made microscopic cameras. One of my coworkers was a soldering queen as she could solder that thinnest gauge wires. Yeah, the industry that I work in, we have a manufacturing facility in Vermont that produces electromagnetic sensors. Sensors that generally are about, I think the smallest we make is 0.4 millimeters in diameters, and it's 300 winds of a particular copper wire that you actually can't solder in an open space because even like your breath and the atmosphere will move the wire. And I don't understand how any of that is possibly done, but they do it. And yeah, it's a medical device manufacturing. Pardon me. Okay, let's get back to this down here. All right, so I've got the last diode in place. Give this a touch. All right, that one's now on, looking good. Trim the leads off of that. Okay, let's flip the instructions. All right, next thing I need to add is one of the chips or an integrated circuit. And that's one of these guys. Here, this is an 8-pin little circuit, and one of the things that is on this little circuit is that there is a little notch on one of the sides. It's like a little half moon has been cut out of this. And so there's also a spot on the PCB board here, right here, for that circuit. It's pretty quick to find because it's got 8 pins, and it's got a little triangle drawn in, which means that you line up that little notch with the triangle. And you do your best to get it in. I probably should put it on the table. Okay, and that is in its place. So again, we'll flip this over. And I'll add some, I need to get a bit more solder off this roll here. Aurora Miniatures will be at HO Track this weekend. I'll put these and then okay. I am happy with that. That is in good shape. Are there any, let me see here. Again, I just want to double check this. So as an aside to this, while we're working our way through it, I just want to give my eyes a bit of a break because I'm going buggy on this. I don't know what the general consensus is, but I have pretty much found it's been pretty quiet online since about Christmas. I was talking with Kris, and he had mentioned, or we had both agreed, that there hasn't been a lot of online activity. A lot of people who generally post videos aren't posting any videos. And one of the things that I was thinking about doing, maybe the next time around we're doing this, is I continually find little channels that maybe have like 300 subs or something, and I genuinely enjoy them. But it's very challenging to dig in and find a lot of these channels. Because they're so obscure. And so what I was thinking about was in the, maybe next month, if people wanted to offer up channels that they have come to find that is important to them or they enjoy, and actually try to make a bit of a repository so that at least I can find a lot more of these channels. Because one of the things that I try to do to be generally supportive is that I queue up a bunch of different videos and put them into watch later, and then I just put them on the television, and while I'm down here for a couple hours, I just watch all of them while I'm going along. It helps out those individuals and gives them a bit of support. And honest to goodness, like, I really enjoy watching some of the smaller channels, like a couple hundred or a couple dozen subscribers, because these are people telling the story that they're interested in, and it entertains me endlessly. And so, if maybe what I might want to do is in the coming month or so, have people just give me channels, their channel, other channels they found, so at least there's a bit more variety. Because I find that, waiting for sort of your standards, they might be putting out a video a month, and I'd rather watch some of this stuff than get lost in Netflix for hours and not know what I want to take a look at. Are there any LEDs for this controller? No, Kris, this particular controller doesn't have any visible lights on it. Okay, so the PCB board, or the IC, the integrated circuit, is in place. We're going to move on to something called a resistor network, and this is a lot less common. It's a little 8-legged freak here, and what it is that the resistance as you move through the pins increases. And so again, it has a designation with a little dot at one end that's going to line up with one of the lines on its location on the PCB. So it just slides in. And before I set this down on the workbench, I'm actually going to tack this one with a bit of solder because it's going to fall out. There, that's in place. Johnny Knoxville, quality channels and model routing are hard to find. I think that's a very fair comment, and I think the other thing is that I have found channels that are wonderful that haven't then posted videos for 5 or 6 years, and I certainly understand how you can get to that state. But I can't imagine, and I guess this comes from a place that I've stepped away from a local club that I've been part of, and it's not any reflection on that particular club. It's aging, and a lot of the gentlemen in that club, I mean, some are now in, palliative care scenarios. They don't have layouts anymore. And aside from the 2 shows that I'm excited to go to, or the 2 open houses this coming month, there's not a lot of sharing that I find happens, at least for where I live. It's very challenging to get together like with the club, modular clubs. I know that Kris is part of a club, and I think Mark might be part of one. And some people certainly are part of clubs. And so, in my opinion, being able to go online and find someone, just shaky camming their video of their layout is actually kind of inspiring. I mean, every time I visit one of these layout tours, yeah, there's layouts that might be in a scale that I'm not interested in or an era, but there's always going to be a couple moments on the layout that I'm really happy to see. And so I do like the idea of just seeing as much as I can. And you get surprised when you start taking a look at other people's layouts that you actually then recognize someone and say, oh my goodness, I know who you are now. All right, let's get this little network installed here. Okay, I'm sorry, I went to an open house at my local club, and it was definitely a Viagra heavy scene. So it's harder for younger people to get into model railroading. That is a very truthful comment, and I should have given out the Timbit for the first comment of the night, but in terms of one of the pithiest comments, that's definitely got it. Is the PWM LED control, is this a PMW pulse width modulator? Is that what I'm... Yeah, Boomer Diorama. Yeah, you know what? Interesting. I just read a post, Raverson Express, that Boomer Diorama is going to move away from working on his railroad to an actual diorama. I think maybe Second World War stuff. He wanted to sort of flip gears. He's been working on his current layout for 3 years, and he said that he wasn't necessarily burned out, but it was just looking... He hasn't lost any passion, but he wants a different project right now. So I'll be curious to see... and the project looks a lot like sort of Militaria modeling. Thunder Mesa is excellent. He also had a video that he published very recently where he said he's sort of stepping back a little bit from the grind, the weekly publishing, to make videos when he's in the mood. I also really enjoy DJ's Train sometimes. He stepped away for a while and he's back doing things as well. His sort of drone work is really interesting. I'm trying to guess what you're putting together, not knowing that 8-pin dip or TO220 component is making it harder. Well, all right, I'll give you one hint. The IC is an LM358, which I think is an op amp. I don't remember. Okay, so the resistor network is now in place. So we're in good shape there. So we're going to move on to the two next type of components, which is transistors. Or is it just one transistor? One little transistor. It looks like a tripod from War of the Worlds. It's got three little legs on it. And again, if you're not familiar with it, the point is that the transistor is like a little gate. And so electricity moves from one outside lead to the other outside lead, but it only is allowed to move through if there's power being applied to the middle lead. So if there is power applied there, it goes through. So it is effectively a gate or a switch. And if you make these about nano-sized and duplicate them about 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times, this is where you get the chips in your computers. This is a big, crude example of a transistor. This is a big, crude switch, and it's got a home on this as well. And I have to find it. And it goes over here, and again, the way that it's been drawn on the printed circuit board is it's got a flat side on it which aligns with the flat side on the component. So we just pop that in and we're good. At the St. Catharines train show this past Sunday, there were lots of younger people and families. I still think there's young people involved in model railroading. Yep, it is the device that made modern digital computing possible. It replaced the vacuum tube. This is probably not the way you should be doing this, but I'm going to do it like this. Again, I'm going to tack one of these in place with a touch of solder. I think going to shows is one thing, building a model is an entirely different thing. How much young guys want to surround and solder on a Thursday nights versus... Okay, so I don't consider myself a totally older guy, but I do like the idea of soldering a few little components. I would say that one of the things that I have found, one of the things that I have found about model railroading is that it could take maybe a few lessons, this is just my opinion, from the tabletop gaming and Warhammer communities. One of the things that those communities do is that they're wildly creative, which applies for the, everything that's going on here, but they also have things that are affordable. Now, I realize wargamers, the guys that collect Warhammer and such, do get bent out of shape with the cost of their games. Which probably means they've never been model railroaders because they have nothing to complain about till they see the cost of the things here. But those are really accessible for people, and they get into wargaming and they're doing all the scenery stuff that's almost identical or the same techniques that are used on model railroading. The only difference is the equipment purchases are really quite expensive for model railroading, and the figurines are fairly reasonable relative to the cost of model railroading. So I wouldn't say that there is a lack of people that might be interested in the hobby because that same sort of stuff is thriving in wargaming. I would suggest that maybe the cost to get into this hobby gets in the way of people wanting to participate. Two random crap 3, you know what? You're doing a really good job. You are basically on the money here. Pat Smith, for the price of a Warhammer 40,000 Leviathan set, I could maybe get one N Scale locomotive with a pre-installed DCC. Is Warhammer like Dungeons and Dragons? In a word, M&M Rails, yeah, it is. It is using miniatures and storytelling within a game scenario. They're not exactly the same at all in terms of the gameplay, but they are similar in terms of the components that are required to enjoy the activities. All right, Transistor is installed. Yes, that AS in electrical engineering technology is good for something after all. Yeah, I was fortunate enough I got to take electronics in high school, and it's really served me well. All right, so in terms of our primer to electronic components, we've moved through resistors, we've moved through diodes, we've moved through a resistor network, we've got an ICU, pair of 3 diodes, and a transistor in place, and we're moving on to one of the last sort of principal electronic components, which is capacitors. And at least this one comes with a big one to demonstrate. Capacitors, again, have cathodes and anodes on them, and the negative side is always marked with a stripe, and to be even more redundant, the positive side has got a longer lead on it. And so this is how you distinguish which direction they go in. And capacitors are like little batteries. Basically, electricity goes in, voltage goes in, they charge up, and then they discharge. And depending upon the size of them, they can really get you. If you open up an old tube television that's been running and cross your finger across one of the great big capacitors in the back, that will wake you up for a month. Johnny Knoxville, the thing that makes model railroading so unique is the number of skills you have to have. Urban planning, woodworking, electrical, art and design, modeling. It's a lot of skills. And I think I would add to that, that you're not necessarily held to having to be good at all of them. I think that one of the joys of it is that there are people that really like to lean into things like the collecting aspect of it, the operations aspect of it, urban design aspect of it, some people scenery design, all those sort of things. Okay, so let's go through here. I need 224. So we're going to start adding the capacitors. There's 2 of those. And so again, I need to get out my phone because I can't read these. I can't believe this is where we're at now. Listen, the education that's going on in this chat is amazing. I'm giving the remedial version, and we've got like an amazing commentary about how these things actually work. All right, I can't read that. So there's 2 of these. I'm going to start with those. We're going to go with 22U. 2 pieces. All right, so again, on the PCB, there's a dot that's been added beside the negative side. And so I'm going to put this in. 22U goes right down in there. And I'll pop that one into place. And trim those leads off. Okay, the second 22U I'm going to find as well. Okay, and that goes in here. If anyone is interested in getting one of these kits, I did put a link in the description of this live stream that you can go visit. The website is certainly not sophisticated, but I got in contact with the guy. I mean, I didn't know what to think because, you know, it had like a simpatico address. It doesn't look like, you know, much of anything. The gentleman who manufactures these is actually out of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And he got back to me quite quickly and he mailed these out. I had them within a week. So, I mean, no problem with customer service. Good evening, Dan. Nice to see you. If anyone is just joining on, and we've had some accurate guesses in the comments. As a recap, a week ago, or within the last week, I finished wiring the principal wiring on the model railroad, my layout, and I wanted to build a variable speed controller from a kit that I had seen online because it was handheld and it's super tiny. I built the first one. It has worked really well, and so because I had a second kit on hand, I'm spending the majority of tonight putting together the second little kit, or at least I'm putting the PCB together tonight. The website was built with Netscape Communicator. Okay, so Johnny, you've just told me how old you are without telling me how old you are, and you are accurate. It reminds me of an Angel Fire website, actually. All right, we got to do 1U. Boy, this is rough, reading these. GeoCities, absolutely. Those were the days. I'm not trying to drag this out, folks. I just want to make sure that I'm not getting this wrong. You know, one of the things I think I'm going to do, well, no. I was going to say, do I want to open up the last one and make sure I'm getting this right? Well, I know where this one goes. Today's internet has nothing compared to the internet of the 90s. It certainly was the Wild West. ASCII artwork, animated GIFs, was a thing of beauty. Johnny Knoxville, blazing 56K. So for anyone who, you know, again, we're talking about how young people being in the hobby, and here I remember when I had my first XT8080 and I had a 1200 baud modem on a party line in the country. I remember the dial-up sound. It was such a satisfying thing when the digital handshake took hold, and now you were now connected, and you could go visit a BBS, a bulletin board system. Do not cite the deep magic to me, which I was there when it was written. Well, thank you, Jake Clee. I haven't burnt myself yet. I am, you know, this coming of age where like I thought my eyes used to work better. I thought my eyes used to work better than this. Or maybe these are just incredibly small components and everything is like 22 something. I'm already totally concerned that I've put the wrong one in a spot. And so I just want to make sure I've got this sorted. So yeah, I got to pull out my phone and do this. What is going on? This N scale thing may come to an abrupt halt in the next 2 years if this keeps up. I can't believe this is the new state of affairs for me here. This is crazy. Okay, listen here, Approach Medium. I'm not sure how to kick people out of the chat, but let's just go easy on me. I'm not a boomer, all right? Sorry, there's nothing wrong with Boomer. Boomer Diorama, top-notch guy. Also a Canuck from the opposite end of the country. I'm Gen X, which means I don't care. But yeah, this is getting... Okay, this is a 22. Thank the baby Jesus. All right, that's a 22. All right, let's go back to seeing if I can't make this work. At least you don't have to wear contacts yet. Listen, well, no, because you can't get bifocular contacts, can you? So I think the amazing thing that I've done here is I've managed to put the wrong one in a spot. You know what we're going to do? This is what we're going to do. We're going to do like a cooking show, and I'm going to pop open a complete one and be like, look, so I put it in the oven and now it comes out perfect. Because I don't think this evening I'm necessarily going to be able to wire the whole thing. So this is the unit I built the other night. I'm going to open it up. Last time I joked about an N scaler going, Dave, yeah, when HO Dave went, yeah. I'm not going HO yet. There are so many parts of, you know, this particular scale I like an awful lot. And generally speaking, this isn't a problem, but these electronics, this has thrown me for a loop. Being able to see this stuff. And, you know, so it's a cautionary tale. Now the chat is full on. So you're going to see. And because I don't have small pliers, I'm going to use water pump pliers to loosen off the toggle. So this is the end state for the controller once the electronics are completely assembled. So we're getting there. All right, so let's see how I'm doing here. So yeah, I messed up. That's amazing. So that goes there, this goes here. Okay, back in the game, So remember when I was talking about how you don't want to have to remove a component? Well, here we go. We're going to try doing it. No solder sucker needed. I got it off. Okay. This is probably what I should have done in the beginning, was just copy what was in front of me. Okay. So one of the things I guess I haven't mentioned about this particular project is then this doesn't generate any power. You have to deliver AC current to it. And so one of your standard like model power or lifelike power packs, if they have a 12 to 14 volt accessory lead on them, that's all you need to make this work. If you have an MRC power pack, the AC adapter on that or the AC connections on that will also work. So there are a number of options to get this to work using fairly inexpensive power. The other thing is that you can go on Amazon and actually just buy a alternating current power supply. Okay, good shape. That one's on. I should have just opened up the old one, or the first one. So now the challenge I have is that because I made a minor mistake with this one, I don't have a solder sucker, and these contacts have now been filled in. So now I'm going to have to attempt to do this with finesse. Okay, so let me see. Keegan, have you thought about adding a servo to your throttle and making it radio controlled so no wires are needed? Or is that what this is? So this is definitely a wired controller, and I don't have a problem with the fact that it is wired. Actually, I really do. I don't know how to put this. There is a very direct contact between running DC. Again, I'm not trying to evangelize people to go backwards in terms of technology, but I like the immediacy of the sort of throttles, that DC throttles, and how they interact with your trains and such. I do like that immediacy. I think if I was to say anything about DC, a couple of the members of the club that I'm part of use radio controlled. Now they do O gauge and G, and they're lithium battery powered from medical batteries, and they're completely wireless radio controlled, which means that the track, you can make whatever configuration you want. There's no worry about loopback circuits. You charge them through the tender with a USB, and they're radio controlled. They are super slick. I think that is the ideal state. This is very, very haptic. It's sort of what you can feel, and I like it. It's just sort of a current day preference for me. Let's see if I can't make this work. All right, so I need to figure out a way. So this really is getting into, so this is where I said you don't want to have to do exactly the thing that I'm doing now, which is trying to get Let's see here. Anyone in the chat who's like worked in electronics is upset with me right now. So what I'm trying to do then, so I've got this somewhat stuffed in, is I need to now get this to push through. Geez, that solder sucker would come in super handy at this point. Have a good evening, Mark. I appreciate it. Actually, as Mark leaves the chat, Mark as in M&M Rails, I should probably say, so this is Third Rail Thursday. There is a trio of us that try to do our best to host mildly entertaining model railroad content on Thursday nights. This channel, which is N Scale Dystopia, I am in charge of the first Thursday of every month. The second Thursday of the month is hosted by Go Via or Go Home, Kris at Go Via or Go Home. The third Thursday is Mark of M&M Rails, and then the final Thursday of the month is something called GVO After Dark, which is typically Mark and Kris complaining about something. And then on the rare occasion you get a fifth Thursday, it's a free-for-all, and there might be guest speakers and such. So it's something we just try to do every Thursday night so that there is a bit of a reprieve for people to have some fun watching someone else burn their fingers and mess up their project. Anyway, back to this. I'm almost tempted to stop because I'm at a bit of I have to do some minor surgeries to get this to work. The problem is you don't want to apply too much heat for too long to a printed circuit board or you can wreck it. And in this case, I really need to think about getting my solder sucker out and fixing this. So I'm going to ignore this capacitor, and this won't be complete tonight because I won't be able to do it. So in addition to the capacitors, the next thing is something called trim pots. There's two of them here. Hope you can see those. And these are just really small versions of this potentiometer, which is something that you turn to adjust the resistance, and these are very tiny. And so these are used, there's something called a zero and one that's called momentum, and this was really impressive to me, is so that these get installed and you adjust the zero so that there is, when you adjust the zero potentiometer, what that means is that the minimum amount of power that's being supplied to your engine. And so when I first hooked this up and I turned it on, the engine just started creeping along, so I needed to adjust it so that it had a value that was a full stop. The second trim pot, though, is for momentum, which is actually great, so that this is a momentum throttle so that when you start it up and put it up a couple notches, the engine sits still and then slowly builds momentum. And the speed that the momentum builds, you adjust right into the PCB, so it's either rather quick or it's sort of slow and meandering. And so I've been playing with those a little bit on the first controller, and it's done quite a bit to add some realism because the engine does, it does get up to speed quite slowly if you want it to. And again, it's just, it has a nice feel to it. I realize that that is a feature that is pretty prevalent with DC, but for DC, it's a nice value add. Okay, so I'm going to add in the pots. And number 2. So I think at this point, so what I would say with this little project at this point is that the next few steps is, when I did it the first time, gets pretty fussy and a lot of big handwork on it. What I would say is that this is mostly complete in terms of the components being installed. The last thing I need to do is wire in, let me just move back to the other camera here. So the last couple components that need to go into this is the speed control potentiometer here and the direction switch. The direction switch is not attached to the printed circuit board. You install it into the case first and then bring the printed circuit board to it and adjust it and finesse it. And then the second part is the heat sink that goes onto this again. And this is all done inside of the box. And then finally, weathering on the, or wiring on the leads, there's the AC power and there's the DC out. And so almost all of the components have been installed onto this board with the exception of something called the bridge recidifier. It's not done. And then from this point forward, putting the remainder of this together gets a little bit ham-fisted. It's not, doesn't make for good TV. So what I'm thinking is that for the purpose of clarity, I probably have taken this little project as far as I can take it tonight reasonably. I realize it's a bit of a stretch to sort of have this overhead camera on something that probably needs a microscope, but it was, I just wanted to try to do my best to show people what the process, or the beginning process of assembling one of these little boards would actually look like. It is a fun project. Probably daylight would be better, and probably eyes that are 10 years younger than the ones that I'm currently sporting would also have been helpful. But let's just be fair that in the last hour I've put 90% of this together, and once it was wired it worked perfectly. So in terms of the assembly, I'm going to stop because I need to work on this in a way that just doesn't work really well here. So I appreciate your patience on that. What do we got going on here in the chat? My favorite video of yours that I have watched is the abandoned Gundam. Yeah, the abandoned Gundam. So I have a friend named Sigurd who lives in Germany, and he is a war gamer, and he invited me to participate in that, and so I got a $2 Gundam. And I have a remaining Gundam that I've thought about trying to hide in this layout somewhere. I have a fairly large city that I'm going to be building in time on the east end of the layout here, and I'm going to have city streets, and one of the things I'm expecting to do is to paint in the remaining Gundam, but put him around a city corner so that he isn't necessarily visible when you walk down the layout. You're like, oh, look, layout. And then as you start to poke around, you've got a Gundam sitting in there. Let's see what else is going on. I need to put these back on. Gundam Smash, you bloody right. One of my other friends online, a channel that I do like watching from time to time, is Pro Scale Models, Weigh-In over there. He's got a number of Gundams, and actually Jason Jensen did some Gundams as well. they're fun because a lot of the Gundams that are designed are made for N scale, and a lot of buildings you can buy very affordably are meant to make dioramas with Gundam. Now, typically they're 1 to 150 scale versus 1 to 160, which isn't a big deal. It hides pretty well, but there is a really affordable number of N-scale buildings that you can get that are just slightly oversized because they're meant for Gundams. In particular, you can get decrepit, destroyed buildings, which works out really well. You know, I'm just reading the comments here, and Johnny Knoxville. Lots of crossover in Model Railroad from graffiti and Ubex community. You know, it's interesting. I was watching a documentary on that, Urbex community, pardon me, and they were talking about how. So I do like graffiti an awful lot, but it probably comes from the fact that I also really like abandoned videos. Like the second thing that I'm interested in. That crosses over here. I mean, so let's go backwards. First of all, this is a pretty sterile railroad at this point. There's really nothing going on in terms of personality. I'm hoping to rapidly change that. Like, for instance, when I redo these boxes, I want these controller boxes to look like the robotic control boxes, like from like the Terminator movie when she lowers the Terminator into the lava, like these industrial sort of like crane controllers and such. But if you take a look at graffiti videos, those are probably the first urban explorers breaking into abandoned spaces and such. And so aside from the graffiti going up, they're great for watching getting inside old structures, which is the thing that I'm most interested in. And so there is an awful lot of videos out there. Like there's a huge subculture of exploring abandoned places on YouTube, and it is a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. But if you want to go one step removed from that, you can start looking at old graffiti videos, and they're just as interesting. And there's a bit of an element of fear there because these people are breaking the law twice, I suppose, because it's break and enter and then vandalism. It's good stuff. The proper people, yeah. And Skinny Puppy, holy Johnny Knoxville. Johnny, you're just bringing out references that are just warm in my heart. You know, gosh, I saw Guar in a Tiny Desk concert, and that just sent me back a huge ton. But Skinny Puppy, I have to get going. Thank you very much, Kevin, for swinging by. This has been sort of a minor hot mess, but I appreciate you guys putting up with me for tonight. I'm wondering what will happen the next time we get on here. I'm thinking about maybe carving styrofoam or doing something like that. You know, to recap here real briefly, the layout has been wired for DCC, but it's going to be run as DC. In terms of being able to enjoy it differently, I've built some handheld throttles, and I've worked on 85% of one here with you tonight. I've stopped the process because I need to make one small minor correction to the PCB because I put the wrong component in the wrong place. I think these sort of projects are super achievable, so if anybody wants to get one of these, there is a link in the description of this video. They're incredibly affordable. They are actually fun to build, and these things work really well. And so if you're building a small shelf layout, this might be a perfect example of something that works really well, or an exhibition layout. And for me, I'm excited to see how these things pan out over the next couple weeks and couple months, because I do like the idea of having these small little throttles that I can walk around with. And ultimately, it's just a small challenge. And really, when I think about the old pages in Model Railroader, and like this was breaking technology about 35 years ago, whenever I was reading the old Model Railroaders, I'm super happy to sort of have this project in front of me. So, it is 9:30 at night. I am thrilled that I have this layout finally wired. I've got an Amtrak F40 and some Horizon cars that I've just been watching go around in a loop over and over again. And I am very optimistic that in now the next coming months, I'll finally get to crack into doing some scenery. I had mentioned in the video, I can't believe it was 6 months ago that I tore this whole thing out, which means that there hasn't been a train run in a circle around here in over 6 months, and that's a bit too long. You get really used to not running trains, and then you run one and you're like, you know what, this is part of the hobby that I'm thrilled with. So I appreciate you guys joining in with me tonight. I think that I probably am going to stop it there. It's been great fun. As I said, in the coming weeks, if you have some suggestions for channels, big or small, that you would like to watch, I would love to keep adding people to my own repertoire and ultimately share it with you guys, so that, as I said, you queue up 30 or 40 videos, go down to your hobby space, turn them on, and let them run in the background and learn something about somebody else that you might not ever have learned anything from in the first place. Have an amazing night, everybody. Be sure to tune in next week to join Mark over at M&M Rail, or Kris over at Go Via or Go Home, and Mark the following week. We're almost out of the cold weather, at least for us in North America. I'm looking forward to the warm stuff coming. Have a great night, and I hope to see you next time.